Unsafe people do not always look unsafe. It's just the opposite. They may be a helpful neighbor, an admired coach, an older kid who babysits, an over-interested teacher, a family friend, relative, parent, or even a step-parent, which are exactly the examples of what I saw during my grand jury experience. Hi, everyone, and thanks for listening to the Ask Mom Parenting podcast, where we take the mystery and the yelling out of modern parenting and offer real life help for parents. I'm Sue, and with me is Randy. And whether you're deep in the toddler tantrums, navigating tween and tween drama, or somewhere in between, you'll get clarity and actionable tools one episode at a time. Please help us reach any of your friends or family who you think might be looking for ways to be a more effective parent by sharing, liking, and commenting. For a long time, I thought stranger danger was the child safety conversation. Don't get in a car with strangers. Don't go anywhere with someone that you don't know. Don't help someone find their lost puppy. Then I sat on our state's grand jury assigned to the child sex assault cases, and I realized just how much of the real conversation is being left unsaid. 93% of children who experience sexual abuse know the person who abused them, and only about 7% of children were abused by strangers. That statistic comes from RAINS, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest Network. Their summary of the U.S. Department of Justice data, and it reflects only cases that are reported to law enforcement, which means that it doesn't account for every child who never gets the chance, the support, or the safety to tell someone about it. My experience on the grand jury was an experience I never expected to have, and one I will not forget. Case after case, the same reality kept showing up. The abuser was rarely a stranger. They were often someone the child knew, trusted, saw regularly, or had been taught to be polite around. And that's why the safety conversation with our kids can no longer stop at the simple stranger danger speech. Most of us have had some version of that talk from our parents, like no adult should ever need to ask a child for help or find their lost dog or to pick you up from school. Today, those words are the bare minimum of what your child needs to hear. Our kids also need to be shown how to recognize an adult who uses extra kindness, special attention, favors, or access to slowly blur the boundaries. And they need to recognize when a friend is trying to pull them into choices they know are wrong by making it feel exciting, normal, or hard to say no. Giving kids permission to pay attention to that uncomfortable feeling, even when the person seems nice, familiar, popular, or trusted by the adults around them, is how we raise their emotional intelligence and protection. Because if strangers are only 7% of the threat, we've got a lot more talking and training to do. Our conversations should include teaching kids how to read people, how to see pressure, secrecy, and discomfort before the situation becomes unsafe. And to do that, we want to create that circle of trust in our relationships and our homes with our kids. Keep communication built on open, non-judgmental conversation where our kids know that unconditionally, without a doubt, we always believe them. We support them and we will fight for them. It's always us against the world. So today's topic is child safety tips, what kids need to know about secrets, pressure, and unsafe adults. And we're going to cover friends too. Adults who groom children often look for access, opportunity, and places where a child may be easier to pressure. The risk grows when an adult can get close or create secrecy, test small boundaries, and find a child who's not yet been taught that they are allowed to say no to an adult. They're allowed to leave and tell someone that they trust. An unsafe adult will take note of a child or a teen who ignores their own discomfort to just be polite. In fact, they'll target it. They may ask invasive questions and see whether the child answers anyway. They may cross a small line and watch to see whether that child laughs it off, stays quiet, or worries more about being rude than what just happened. We aren't talking about weakness here. It's often what kids have been taught to do with adults. Be agreeable, be respectful, don't make a scene. But with the right conversations, kids can learn to pay attention to that uneasy feeling instead of talking themselves out of it. They can learn that discomfort is actually just information. and they don't owe an adult an answer, and that there are safe ways to leave, get help, and tell. Today's focus is going to be more on in-person interactions, and I'm saving online safety for a separate episode because I think it deserves its own conversation and its own set of skills.
Yeah, this is such an important topic to be talking about and noticing behavior and like early signs of pressure. Because as you mentioned, so many people who pressure kids, even other kids, they can come off as very nice and friendly. And it can be confusing for a kid. And this is a topic like I'm certainly interested in. I have two kids, 8, and my daughter's about to be 12, and they're both very different. Like my daughter, she's like skeptical of everybody, but my son, everyone is nice and everyone is sort of trustworthy. And I know, like, for him, he just wants the world to be a happy, safe place. And he's like, everyone's so nice. Like, even strangers, like, will be in the store and he's like, oh, that guy smiled at me. He's so nice. And so I'm like navigating this very differently. Well, in a way, both of them because they're just so different. But their school, luckily, does talk to them about the importance of this for in person and online. And and I know that like teaching them, nice and safe aren't always the same thing is super important. And I do definitely, kind of agree with everything you're saying. Like it's a skill, and the earlier they build it, the better.
Yeah, I think it's great that your school teaches that safety. And I know our schools around here also have a lot of talks and police officers and people coming in, but I am not, nor did I back when our kids were younger, rely on anybody else to have any of these conversations with my kids because we need to create that relationship of openness and trust with our kids. So this episode is about empowering parents to kind of open their eyes and talk about, I've structured this episode to be a little bit more of a how-to because parents that I've worked with have found that these types of specific tips will be most helpful in having the safety conversations that they want to have with their kids that don't feel scary or fear-based. Just like how to explain pressure and how to notice red flags and sensitive topics, like what unsafe pressure looks like, how to get your child to trust their gut and the best ways to handle sleepovers. We're covering all of that today. I'm going in a different direction from what most topics about safety conversations cover because this is the deeper essence. This is the skill. I like to talk a lot about building skills for our kids in daily life from not just today, but what can they take with them in the future. So this isn't just about interacting with an adult at 7 or 12 with your daughter, but it's ongoing and what can they take with them into the future. So let's get started. Our first segment is when don't tell becomes the red flag. One of the strongest safety rules that you can instill in your family is this: no one gets to ask you to keep secrets from us. Not another adult and not a friend. Also, while I'm at it, just as important is having a family safe word. If you haven't had training conversations with your kids about family safe words, you want to do that. And it's really fun to get the kids involved, like I always talk about, and they pick a funny word. And there's so much going on with AI and fake phone calls and fake FaceTimes. Uh, Having a safe word is one of the most important things you can do as well, but also teaching kids about not keeping secrets and keeping that line of communication open with your kids. When a child is asked to keep a secret from their mom or dad, it makes them feel confused and worried or guilty, keeping something hidden from the people who care most about them. And I know I've got a couple of examples in when we were raising our kids. One of my kids had a neighbor that was sharing with her. They were probably 13, and the neighbor girl was sneaking out of her house. They had a daylight basement, which is always a recipe for disaster. Anyway, they had a daylight basement, and she was sneaking out and riding her bike like 20 minutes across town to go meet a guy. And also, she was sneaking that guy into her daylight basement. And she shared this with my daughter. And so again, we're creating this relationship of trust. My daughter told me, and the way that I handled it was, thank you for telling me. And then I always ask, do I have permission to tell the mom? Thanks for telling me, but this information stays between you and I. Do you think I should tell this child's mom? And I, in this case, did get permission to tell the mom, and it worked out great. And the mom was able to catch her in the act. And again, I'm always protecting my sources. I'm not going behind my daughter's back with this information. And then in another example, uh, one of My other kids had a friend that was experimenting with drugs. They were doing the vapes, the marijuana vapes. I can't remember the name, but they were probably, I don't know, 15, 16. And I said, thanks for telling me. What do you think we should do about it? Do you think the mom should know? And I was told at that time, absolutely not. Do not tell the mom because I think this information would get back to me for telling. And I'm like, you got it. And, if my kids are telling me these types of secrets, then hopefully that means maybe they're not doing it. I don't know. But again, teenagers are a whole nother beast, but this just gives you an example of some of the conversations to have about secrets. We can practice a conversation with our kids about what to do if this does happen to them. If you're being asked to keep a secret, you want to give kids a built-in exit plan. Common advice is to tell us to teach our kids to say to the adult, I don't keep secrets from my mom and dad, or I'm going to tell them anyway. And that sounds strong, and that sounds like the kind of confidence that we want our kids to have. However, I don't agree with that advice. I don't love putting the responsibility on a child to confront someone who may have bad intentions. Instead, I want kids to know they don't have to argue, they don't have to accuse, they don't have to prove that they know something is wrong. They can simply say, okay, to get themselves out of that moment and then tell you as soon as they safely can. Like I said, I'm not a fan of confronting an adult in that situation. It's not the child's job to manage an unsafe adult or a friend. Their job is to just get safe and get the information to you. Because when someone has bad intentions, you don't want your child feeling like they have to be brave enough to challenge them alone. Instead, you want them to know, I can keep myself safe right now, and my parent will handle the rest. This type of training today will go a long way in preparing your child when they're faced with this in real time. If these situations don't feel unexpected for them, then they'll know what to do. Then, after talking about secrets, you want to tell them exactly what will happen after they tell you. So, first, when our child comes to us, we don't under any circumstances react. We just stay neutral and we believe them. This is not the time for an interrogation or showing fear. A simple, I'm really glad you told me, will suffice. Keep it simple, and kids need to know that they won't be blamed, embarrassed, or punished for telling you something that's uncomfortable. So walk them through it as part of the practice conversations and just general conversations when you're driving in the car to sports practice or whatever. Just have these conversations easy breezy. So walk them through it. If someone says something that makes you uncomfortable or asks you not to tell us, don't challenge that person in the moment. Just get away from that person as safely as possible. And then you can come tell us. You won't be in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong. You did the right thing by telling us. They need to hear this from you now in a regular daily conversation. Then follow up with how you'll have their back by treating the information carefully and not exposing them as your sole source. Then, follow up with them about how you'll have their back and you'll be treating this information and carefully and not exposing them as your source, if that's an option. With older kids or teens, you can say that you'll always keep their secret if you feel that you can. Like in my earlier example with my kids, you'll always ask permission to act on the information. It's situation dependent, of course, but putting your child in the driver's seat with trusting you goes a very long way to building that solid, open, communicative relationship that you want with them. So, how grooming starts small, what unsafe pressure looks like and sounds like. Not every red flag looks red in the beginning. It often starts pink and small, with special attention, private jokes, gifts, favors, extra access, an adult who makes a child feel more mature, more trusted, and more special than the other kids. These are interactions that you want to prepare your kids for ahead of time. Kids are far more likely to be pressured by someone who seems familiar, fun, helpful, generous, or trusted by the adults around them. And that's what makes being groomed so confusing to a child. Unsafe people do not always look unsafe. It's just the opposite. They may be a helpful neighbor, an admired coach, an older kid who babysits, an over-interested teacher, a family friend, relative, parent, or even a step-parent, which are exactly the examples of what I saw during my grand jury experience. What matters is not whether someone seems nice. What matters is whether they are trying to create secrecy, special access, gentle pressure, distance between their child and you. And I would say this very plainly to your kids. No adult, older kid, friend, coach, teacher, or neighbor gets to ask you to keep something from me that makes you feel confused, uncomfortable, trapped, guilty, or weird inside. And I would add, when someone says, don't tell your mom or dad, that is not a little thing. That is your signal to tell us, and that is a red flag. Some statements to watch for would be, you're so special, but don't tell your parents we talk. Your parents would not understand. You can tell me things that you can't tell anyone else. I trust you more than other kids. You're so mature for your age. You're my favorite. Or, you know, I would never hurt you. You can take that to the bank when people tell you something that they are or aren't. It's the opposite. A single comment doesn't automatically mean someone is unsafe. But when someone repeatedly makes your child feel specially chosen or asks for secrecy or maybe tests small boundaries, that is a pattern that adults need to take seriously and teach their kids to look for and to tell you about. Sharing these examples with your kids gives them an idea of what manipulation can sound like before somebody gets the chance to use it.
Yeah, I think those are great. That's actually a lot of what you just said, are things that I'm doing now with my kids, and kind of like goes to what I mentioned before. It's a lot easier with my daughter because she seems to kind of get it, understand it. My son is sort of in denial a little bit about things, so it's just going to take a little bit longer. I think, maturity level and whatnot. But I totally love this because I think working in and talking to kids, constantly about this stuff is just so, so important. It's interesting you mentioned being on the grand jury. My father had a grand jury experience many years ago. And that was it was several cases, as you know, and in that case, it was a lot of physical harm
Mhm.
against children. And again, like you mentioned, all adults they knew and trusted. And I was in college at the time, and he actually called me up like crying. Oh, it
Oh.
was he just was like, I just all the stuff I'm seeing, like, this is so terrible. um so as you mentioned, it's just super important conversations to have, and definitely I'm trying to do that as well. And it's like having these conversations are super important because, as you mentioned way earlier, I'm still in the generation where everything was stranger danger, and that's all my parents knew to treat me, to teach me. So where this is kind of new territory, but luckily, conversations like these help like propel the conversation forward. um and not only was I not like raised with these types of nuanced conversations, I was just kind of raised in an environment, kind of got handed down from my grandmother. It was like children should be seen and not heard, kind of thing. Just be polite, give this Aunt Susie a hug, even if you haven't seen her in 10 years. So, that's kind of how I was raised. So I don't even know if I would be equipped, as a young kid with how to handle these situations. So definitely think these conversations are super important to make sure our kids are equipped to handle all these types of situations.
I remember reading about a girl that was raped and she was found in the woods. It was, I don't know, late 70s maybe. And I remember being really scared that was going to happen to me. She was my age. She was stolen from a gas station. And she was about my age, at the time. And I remember being really upset. And I think I was crying at night. My mom came into my room, like, what's wrong? And I said, well, I'm really worried that's going to happen to me. Ah, you're fine. Nah, and okay, and I kind of just had to work through those feelings of fear, and nobody was having training conversations or, and I'm not blaming her.
Oh
Times were
yeah.
simpler back then, but if we think today that we shouldn't be addressing this stuff with our kids and just entering these conversations into our regular day, cutting out articles, whatever, the temptation is that we don't want to scare our kids. And actually, it's quite the opposite, that information is empowerment. So, my third segment here is that let's stop teaching politeness at the expense of personal instinct and listening to your gut. Some of us have to unlearn the idea that children should be polite to adults no matter what. We tell them, say hello, give them a hug, answer the grown up, don't be rude. There is a time and a place to teach manners, and I want my kids to know how to look an adult in the eye, offer a firm handshake, and speak with confidence when I'm right there with them. But that's a very different thing from an adult waiting for a moment that the child is alone so they can test a small boundary or ask an uncomfortable question. And they want to see if the child is going to remain polite or whether they'll push back or walk away. So I want kids to hear this clearly from their parents. You are never required to be polite when you feel unsafe, uncomfortable, pressured, or confused with an adult. That does not mean that we raise our kids to be disrespectful. It means that we're teaching them discernment, being aware of and listening to their own instincts. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to refuse the hug with a simple no, thank you. You are allowed to leave and you are allowed to say, I don't like that. And you're always allowed to call me. I'm here for you whenever you need me. Another person's comfort doesn't matter more than your safety. And respecting adults doesn't mean automatic compliance. Kids are allowed to pause, check in with themselves, and respond based on what their instincts are telling them. And this takes practice in like low stakes moments, like let them come stand beside you without forcing them to explain themselves in the moment. That's how kids learn that their instincts are also allowed in the room. I've talked a lot about helping connect ourselves and our kids to our gut instincts and how to listen to our own feelings and instead of the external drivel that's out there, always checking from within. Talking intuition may seem mystical to some, but it doesn't have to be. Our kids can be shown how to recognize the signs of the hair standing up on the back of their neck, or their chest tightening, or that weird feeling in their stomach. They should always believe themselves, just like we tell them we will always believe them. We are our own best compass, and that is a skill that our kids can lean on for the rest of their life. You can say, when your body gives you a weird feeling, you don't have to figure everything out right there. You can leave, get space, and come tell someone that you trust. This is such a better message than be nice. Maybe they didn't mean it. I can honestly say that my kids were never wrong when they met somebody as a new friend or I don't know, at a party and they said they didn't care for them. I always honored that. And I'll be damned if it didn't come back around later that I was like, ah, they were right.
Yeah, this is super important. All of this conversation. I love the trust your instincts. That's super important. It does remind me of a couple things. One thing was like, yeah, my mom just did not know how to handle any of this stuff. Like you said, no fault of their own. I think it's just the way they were taught. But I had boys, bother me and things like that, and it was just ignore it kind of conversation. So I knew when I had kids, like I didn't want that because it's also it just kind of came with a feeling of just dismissiveness, really. Um, and so like I remember when there's been like a lot of talk, the last several years. It just seems like more and more talk is ramping up on especially like girls and getting having some form of like sexual harassment or harassment in general, like almost always, right? Like most young girls and women can say that that's been their experience. And it really struck me when my daughter, so she was in first grade, and I get a phone call from the school kind of early afternoon, and I answered it and was told that a boy we're very familiar with, he actually lives in our neighborhood, was standing behind her in line. They were going somewhere, and just kind of seemingly out of complete nowhere, luckily the teacher actually saw it, just like took his hands and grabbed her butt.
Oh,
Just totally just grabbed her butt. And, I was like, whoa. And it just, I remember like the rest of the afternoon just feeling very heavy that, like, like reading all this stuff that people are saying online. And here my child was in first grade and had experienced that. Well, fast forward to the second grade, boys in her same class, and she's just walking, in the lunchroom, and he just goes up and punches her right in the chest. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. Like it just really solidified for me, just like these conversations are super important early on. And like you said, if you just kind of work them in uh, often and they're in small increments and like you're teaching skills, I find that that's like the easiest because they are ongoing conversations. And then that's what leads, I also think it leads to it feeling like less scary. And it's just a part of everyday conversation, you know?
It's funny that that is these days, we were always told, oh, he just has a crush on you, or they're jealous of you, all this, stuff. And now, yeah, that was our parents' way, or, earlier generations' way of saying just, it's fine, it doesn't mean anything. But now we're taking this stuff way more seriously. And I always appreciated situations like that because it gave me a chance to have a conversation. And we've talked about bullying before in earlier episodes, but these kids, they learn this stuff at home, sadly,
Hmm.
especially at these young ages. And we had one of our kids was picked on and bullied, I don't know, probably in first grade by an older kid who was like in sixth grade. We had a school that went from kindergarten to eighth, I believe. And he was struggling with his sexuality, and there was a lot of problem at home. And he was taking that out on a little first grader, was one of my kids. And come I actually knew I could read the situation. I knew what was going on, not personally, but I could see, I knew I could just sense what was happening. So we had a conversation with our son about it, and hey, there's something going on at home. There's unhappy, this is not about you. And these are just opportunities for us to, when a real life situation occurs, give our kids a little bit of insight, empathy, and understanding, but also how to create that boundary for themselves. And come to find out, the parents did separate and he did come out and everything was great. And it was his mom handled everything beautifully. And they turned out to go to high school together and play on a team together, and it was all fine. But the way that we handle things is like, again, openness, support, believing them, and treating this as information, not a fearful conversation that we're afraid is going to traumatize our kids. This is our responsibility. So I'm really glad you were willing to share your personal story, because parents need to understand that these conversations are not being overprotective. They are preparation and practice for if their child is faced with these situations in, real life. So, my segment 4 is when friendship feels good and when friendship feels bad, and how to tell and what to do. Experiences with friends are where kids practice their boundary keeping skills long before they need them in a bigger moment with an adult. A child who learns how to say no when a friend pressures them, or to take a toy, or leave someone out, or lie, or cheat, or maybe join in on the bullying, is a child that's building a muscle with our help. So that muscle is not just say no. It's I can tolerate someone else being unhappy with me. I can survive not fitting in for a minute. And I'm not for sale at any price because I know what I stand for. And I have support at home. They feel that support at home. That is just enormous. Those types of things that a child will feel from these conversations is a giant step toward their protection. Have these open dialogues with your kids as early and ongoingly as possible. And if your child is older and you haven't had them yet, it is never too late. We are showing our kids how to access the big picture and consider the long game. Like I talk about in my book, I have a dynamic decision making process where we're able to kind of flex that decision making muscle between short term and long term to make our best choice in that moment. And, we're talking about creating skills and building muscle, skill, memory for our kids that will take them throughout life, when they're teenagers, when they're in college, and when they're living in their first apartment. So here's some quick examples of phrases that you can teach your kids at every age or phase. And if these feel helpful and you want to go a little deeper, email me for my free PDF of safety tips and scripts that is just a reference sheet. I'd be happy to send it to you. So for toddlers and preschools, if a friend says, "You're not my friend if you don't give me that toy," your child can say, "I'm still using it," or "You can have it when I'm done." Or if a friend says, "Come on, just throw it," the child can say, "I'm not doing that. I am going to play over here." So this is just boundary setting. For a school age kid, if a friend says everybody else is doing it, your child can say, "I'm not everyone," or "That's not for me." Or if a friend says, "Just cheat, nobody's going to know," your child can say, "I'm not getting in trouble for that," or "No, I'll do it on my own." And for tweens and teens, a friend will say, "Don't be boring." I know that happened with my kids a lot. You're boring, because they were busy and they were doing their own thing and they weren't out looking for trouble. Don't be boring. And a teen can say, "It's okay if you think I'm boring. I'm not trying to please you." And if a friend says, if you were really my friend, you'd cover for me, your teen can say, I am your friend, but I'm not lying for you. So here's what some ideas of what a bad friend can feel like. And again, preparing your kids for these types of things to look for before you need to look for them will open that door for communication. Because if you have this conversation now, by the time they get to be tweens and they're having more interactions with friends, they'll remember, oh, my mom told me about that. And now that's going to open the door for them to come back and talk to you. If they're pressuring you to be someone that you feel uncomfortable being, if they make you feel like you have to earn their kindness, or if they ignore your no or mock what matters to you, they behave one way in public and another in private, and maybe they demand immediate access to you. If you want to help minimize access to these bad friends, instead of saying, I don't like that friend, you can't see them anymore, try just asking, you know, how do you feel after you hang out with them? What happens if you say no to them? And this just gives your child language. I don't think it's important to always ban a friend in order to protect your child from the friend. Sometimes you just make your child less available. You can keep them productively busy with hobbies and sports and family time. You know, whatever things that you can come up with that just gives that child maybe access for 1 or 2 hours instead of the whole day, whatever fits your child. But I've mentioned in earlier podcasts that one of my kids had a friend who checked every box for everything that you would never want your kid exposed to. But I actually really like this kid, and I just made sure that we built a little bit more of a limited access bubble around our kid. And again, I was so grateful to this kid because it opened up all these conversations about guns and lighting things on fire and girls and all of this that then trickled down to some of the other younger kids. What a good friend feels like. They celebrate your wins. They aren't threatened by you having other friends. They respect your no. They don't make you prove your loyalty by doing things that go against your values. And a good friend feels safe and happy more often than they feel confusing or exhausting. I remember when I met my husband after dating throughout, high school, college, whatever, the very first emotion I felt pretty immediately was like, wow, I really feel safe with this guy. Safety, making your kids feel safe, a friend who makes you feel safe, that you can be yourself and tell them anything without consequences, that you just are going to accept you unconditionally. That's your winner right there. That is worth its weight in gold. Segment 5 is sleepovers, and I feel like I can't have a safety conversation or podcast without mentioning sleepovers. It's such a big part of a child's growing up. This is one part of safety that parents don't really talk about nearly enough. And sometimes the risk is not only from adults. Sexual harm from teen to teen or child to child is serious enough that we can't dismiss it. It can involve siblings, older kids, peers, family friends, or other children present in the home. And prevention professionals treat child on child sexual abuse as its own category and issue because it deserves real attention. Not denial, not panic, and not kids will be kids. Older children, teens, siblings, friends, or other kids in the home can pressure, expose, coerce, or harm a younger child. The exact statistics vary depending on how researchers define ages and behaviors, but this isn't something parents should brush aside. That's why when we think about sleepovers, the question can't only be, do I trust the parents or are the parents going to be home? We also need to ask who else will be in the home. Are there older siblings, older friends coming and going? Where will the kids sleep? Will there be a real adult supervising and not just adults somewhere else in the house? From my grand jury experience, I can't tell you the amount of parents who open their homes and couches to coworkers and cousins passing through, and those were the very people that abused children in the home. At our house, I would make rules very clear. Kids sleep in a common area or they sleep separately. We're not putting kids in beds together. Devices are put away and locked up at night too. I'm not trying to control another family's parenting, but I can't be responsible for what access they allow on their child's phone or tablet. What websites are available on their screen and what kind of rules they have. I'm also not going to pretend that I can monitor all of that. I can only be clear about what happens in my home. You can simply say, at our house, these are our rules, or just don't sleep over. And yes, they may mean having an awkward conversation with your child and their friend, but have it anyway. That's our responsibility. Because sometimes the conversation happening in your home may be the very first time another child realizes that what's happening in their home is not normal. There were times we had out of town visitors on our couch and we locked our kids' doors from inside. Nobody was trying to sneak into that kid's room in the middle of the night. We weren't taking any chances. And our last segment, number 6, I felt like it was important to just have a quick conversation about what to do in preparation for if your child gets lost. This may sound counterintuitive, especially when you're outside, but kids should know that if they get separated from me while camping, hiking, somewhere outside, they should stay close to where they are and not wander off to find me. Tell them, stay where you are if it feels safe. Make yourself visible and make noise. And this is for outside, for camping, for outdoor stuff. The more you keep moving, the bigger the search area becomes. Staying put will give an adult looking for you a much better chance of finding you quickly. My husband was very clear about this with our kids based on his military training. And at first, it felt kind of backwards to me, but it's standard search and rescue guidance. Stay calm, stay visible, and stay put when you're lost outside. Now, in a store or an airport or a crowded event, the rule changes a little bit. Don't wander around looking for me. Find a safe place adult. And what a safe place adult is like a cashier or a front desk worker, a police officer, or another parent with a child. That would be, a safe place adult. And the child can say, I'm separated from my parent, I need help. So I hope some of these basic safety tips were helpful for you and at least give you some meaningful conversations to get started because information is power. By putting it out there, you're neutralizing any fear with your leadership. You're not stoking it. The goal is to give them the tools for when you're not standing next to them and to build the trusting relationship that gets them talking to you. Like most life skills we want our kids to have, the safety conversation is an ever-changing landscape based on age, maturity, exposure to life outside your home. And it requires repeated conversations, training, practice, role playing. Teaching this type of awareness takes years of layering and repetition, not just a one and done conversation. If today's episode brought up a situation in your house, maybe a friendship that feels off, or a secret your child was asked to keep, or a conversation you're not sure how to start, again, reach out to me via my contact page on askmomparenting.com and request my free safety tips and scripts PDF. Thank you for listening and happy parenting.